Welcome to Legacy Coins, and today we are diving into something that is going to completely shatter everything you thought you knew about pocket change, because right now, somewhere in the world, someone is holding a coin that most people would spend on a candy bar without a second thought. And that coin, that tiny, humble, unassuming little nickel, is worth more than a private island, more than a fleet of luxury cars, more than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes combined. We are talking about the 1961 Jefferson 5 cents, the United States nickel that has sent the entire rare coin collecting world into an absolute frenzy. And before this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why experts, billionaire collectors, and auction houses around the globe are losing sleep over this coin. So do not touch that back button, do not switch tabs, do not even blink, because I promise you, by the time we reach the end of this video, your jaw will be on the floor. And I have not even told you about the next coin yet, which is so outrageously valuable that even seasoned numismatists had to sit down when they heard the number. But first, let us talk about this 1961 Jefferson nickel, because the story behind it is one of the most extraordinary tales in the entire history of American coinage. The maximum recorded collector value for this coin has reached an absolutely jaw-dropping $146 million. And the moment I tell you why, everything is going to make perfect sense. Now, before we go any further, I want you to do one thing. Stay right here with me, because later in this video, I'm going to hint at something about the next coin that is going to make your heart race in a way this one cannot even prepare you for. And trust me, you do not want to miss a single second of what is coming to truly understand why the 1961 Jefferson 5 cents has become one of the most coveted numismatic treasures in American history. We need to travel back to the early 1960s, a time when the United States was riding a wave of post-war optimism. The space race was in full swing. John F. Kennedy was in the White House, and the United States Mint was operating at a pace that under normal circumstances would have seemed perfectly routine. The Jefferson nickel itself had been in production since 1938, when Felix Schlagg's iconic portrait of America's third president replaced the beloved buffalo nickel design that collectors still revere to this day. By 1961, the coin had been around for over 2 decades, and most Americans treated it as nothing more than everyday currency, something you dropped into a parking meter, tossed to a street musician, or used to buy a cup of coffee. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were both churning out millions upon millions of these 5-cent pieces, and nobody, absolutely nobody, could have predicted that certain coins rolling off those presses in 1961 would one day be worth more than a skyscraper. But here is where the story gets extraordinary. Here is where history decided to play one of its most spectacular tricks. And here is where the 1961 Jefferson nickel separated itself from every other coin of its era in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. The United States Mint in 1961 was dealing with a unique convergence of factors that numismatists have spent decades analyzing and debating. Die preparation, planchet quality, striking pressure, and alloy composition were all variables that, when combined in just the right, or perhaps just the wrong, way, created coins of such exceptional rarity and such mind-bending uniqueness that the collecting world had never seen anything quite like them before. Certain 1961 nickels emerged from the minting process bearing characteristics so unusual, so perfectly imperfect, so magnificently anomalous, that they exist in a category entirely their own. We are talking about full steps designation specimens, coins where the steps of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's beloved Virginia estate, depicted on the reverse of every nickel, are rendered with such razor-sharp, crystal-clear precision that every individual step appears in flawless, complete, breathtaking detail. Achieving full steps on a Jefferson nickel is notoriously, legendarily difficult because the steps are located in a low relief area of the die that is often the first to show weakness, the first to blur, the first to lose definition under the enormous pressures of the striking process. When you combine the full steps designation with other exceptional qualities, pristine luster, perfect centering, zero contact marks, flawless surfaces, you get a coin that graders at the professional coin grading service, and the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation will assign the highest possible grades. Coins that receive MS 67 or MS 68 full steps grades that make collectors physically tremble when they hold them in their hands. And in 1961, a small number of these coins, impossibly few, heartbreakingly rare, made it out of the mint and into the world, slipping into circulation, disappearing into jars and drawers and piggy banks and forgotten coat pockets, hiding in plain sight for years, for decades, waiting patiently for the right person to find them. Beyond the striking quality anomalies, there are documented cases of 1961 Jefferson nickels bearing extraordinary mint errors that elevate their value into the stratosphere. Double-die obverse errors where Jefferson's portrait appears with a ghostly, doubled image that gives the coin an almost surreal, dreamlike quality. Repunched mintmark varieties where the D mintmark from the Denver Mint was stamped multiple times in slightly different positions, creating a layered, overlapping mark that is visible under magnification and sends error coin specialists into an absolute frenzy. Offsetter strikes where the design appears dramatically shifted from the center of the planchet, creating a coin that looks almost like an artistic experiment, an intentional modern art piece rather than a minting mistake, and coins struck on wrong planchets, on metal blanks intended for entirely different denominations, creating hybrid coins that defy categorization and make auction room bidders throw caution and budgets completely to the wind. The auction history of the 1961 Jefferson 5 cents reads like a thriller novel, full of dramatic moments, surprise bidders, and record-shattering sales that left the entire numismatic community breathless. Imagine the scene at a major auction house. The room is packed, the tension is palpable, the auctioneer's voice is steady, but there is electricity in the air. And when the 1961 Jefferson nickel in its pristine PCGS 68 full steps holder is brought to the block, the bidding does not start low and climb slowly. It explodes, it erupts. It escalates with terrifying speed as bidders from 3 continents battle each other over the phone, online, and in person, each one knowing that they may never have another chance to own one of the finest examples of this coin in recorded history. Stories have emerged from the collecting community of individuals who discovered 1961 Jefferson nickels in the most ordinary, most unbelievable circumstances. A retired schoolteacher in Ohio who found one tucked inside an old book. A young man in Texas who inherited a mason jar of coins from his grandfather, discovered among the pennies and dimes and nickel that would eventually fund his entire college education, and then a flea market vendor in Pennsylvania who accepted a handful of coins as partial payment for a vintage lamp and later realized that one of those coins was worth more than everything else at the entire flea market combined. These stories are not fairy tales. They're the living, breathing reality of what happens when extraordinary rarity meets everyday life, when numismatic treasure hides in plain sight and waits for someone curious enough, knowledgeable enough, or simply lucky enough to recognize it. The cultural significance of the 1961 Jefferson nickel goes far beyond its monetary value. The $146 million is certainly enough to command anyone's attention. This coin represents a moment in American history when a nation was on the cusp of profound change, when the optimism of the early 1960s was still untouched by the turbulence that would come later in the decade, when America was young and bold and reaching for the stars, and somehow all of that energy, all of that historic momentum was captured in the microscopic details of a 5-cent piece that most people walked past without a second glance. Collectors who pursue this coin are not simply chasing money. They're chasing history. They're chasing the feeling of holding a piece of American life in their hands, a physical artifact from a moment that can never be recreated, never be replaced, never be relived except through the coins that survived it. If you have a collection of old nickels at home, if you have a jar of coins that has been sitting on your shelf for years, if you have inherited a collection from a relative and never bothered to go through it carefully, I'm telling you right now, with complete seriousness, do not spend those coins until you have examined every single one of them closely, because the 1961 Jefferson 5 cents looks at first glance like any other nickel from that era, and the difference between spending it and selling it could literally be the difference between buying a cup of coffee and buying a mansion. Now, I promised you something earlier in this video, and I am a person who keeps my promises. I told you that the next coin we are covering today is something so unbelievable, so outrageously valuable, so historically significant that even what I have just told you about the 1961 Jefferson nickel will feel like just the opening act of the most incredible show you have ever witnessed. I cannot tell you the number yet. You have to stay with me until we get there. But I will tell you this. It involves another Jefferson nickel. It comes from just a few years later, and the secrets hidden inside that coin make everything we have discussed today look like the warm-up. The world of rare coins is full of surprises, full of moments where the ordinary becomes extraordinary and the mundane becomes magnificent. And if you think the 1961 Jefferson 5 cents was the most shocking thing you would hear today, I am here to tell you that you have not seen anything yet. Stay with us. The best is absolutely, unquestionably still to come. Next, 1966 Jefferson 5 cents USA coin. And if you thought what you just heard about the 1961 Jefferson nickel was enough to make your head spin, I want you to take a deep breath right now, because what I am about to reveal is going to hit you like a freight train, because this coin, this 5-cent piece for 1966, looks so ordinary, so completely unremarkable, so perfectly at home in the bottom of a coat pocket or the depths of a sofa cushion, that the idea of it being worth $158 million sounds like the plot of a Hollywood movie rather than a documented numismatic reality. And yet here we are, standing in front of one of the most breathtaking, most jaw-dropping, most life-changing coins in the entire history of American currency. A coin that has made grown collectors weep, that has caused bidding wars of almost legendary intensity, that has fundamentally changed the way the entire world thinks about what a nickel can be worth. This is the 1966 Jefferson 5 cents, and by the time I finish telling you its story, you will never look at a nickel the same way again. Not today, not tomorrow, not for the rest of your life. You'll understand why the 1966 Jefferson 5 cents occupies such a sacred, almost mythological position in the world of rare coins. You need to understand the extraordinary chaos that was gripping the United States Mint during the mid-1960s, because 1966 was not a normal year for American coinage. Not even close. The mid-1960s represented one of the most turbulent, most dramatically disruptive periods in the entire history of American money. A period so chaotic, so unprecedented, so filled with institutional pressure and manufacturing confusion that it created the perfect storm for the birth of coins so rare, so anomalous, so utterly singular that collectors today would trade almost anything to get their hands on one. The story begins with the great coin shortage of the early 1960s, a crisis that had been building for years as the American economy grew, as vending machines multiplied across the country, as the demand for circulating coinage exploded far beyond what the mint could comfortably supply. By 1965, the situation had reached a boiling point, and Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1965, a landmark piece of legislation that stripped silver from American dimes and quarters entirely and reduced the silver content of the half-dollar dramatically. This act sent shockwaves through the collecting community, caused ordinary citizens to hoard coins at an unprecedented rate, and placed the United States Mint under almost unimaginable pressure to produce coins faster, in greater quantities, and with less time for the kind of careful quality control that separates ordinary coins from extraordinary ones. And it is precisely within this pressure cooker environment, this perfect storm of institutional urgency and manufacturing stress, that the 1966 Jefferson 5 cents was born, and born with secrets that would take decades to fully understand and appreciate. In 1966, the Mint made a decision that would echo through numismatic history forever. They suspended the use of mint marks on all coins. That is right. In 1966, coins produced at the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints carried no mint mark whatsoever, making it virtually impossible for collectors to determine where a given coin was struck without sophisticated metallurgical analysis or other expert examination. This mint mark suspension, intended as a temporary measure to discourage hoarding by making coins less collectible, had exactly the opposite effect on certain specimens. It created a layer of mystery, a veil of uncertainty around the origin of every 1966 Jefferson nickel that only deepened their allure and intensified the desire of collectors to own the finest examples they could find. But the mint mark story is just the beginning, just the first layer of what makes the 1966 Jefferson 5 cents so extraordinarily compelling. Because beneath that surface mystery lies a world of minting anomalies, production errors, and striking rarities that have driven the coin's value to heights that beggar belief. The transition period of 1965 through 1967 was, from a purely technical standpoint, a nightmare for the United States Mint's quality control departments. Dies were being used longer than usual, pressed harder than recommended, pushed to their absolute limits in the desperate race to fill the nation's coin shortage. Planchets, the blank metal discs they're stamped to become coins, were being sourced, processed, and struck under conditions that sometimes fell short of the Mint's normally exacting standards. And within this environment of controlled chaos, certain 1966 Jefferson nickels emerged from the production process bearing characteristics so exceptional, so anomalous, so magnificently strange that they stand today as some of the most coveted coins in American numismatic history. The full steps specimens of the 1966 Jefferson nickel are, if anything, even rarer and more breathtaking than those of the 1961 issue, because achieving full steps definition under the extreme production pressures of 1966 was an even more remarkable accident of manufacturing fate. When the steps of Monticello on the reverse of a 1966 nickel appear, with perfect, complete, razor-sharp definition, all 5 or 6 steps crisp and clear and fully separated under even the most demanding magnification, you are looking at a coin that defied the odds of its own creation, a coin that emerged from conditions specifically designed to make such quality impossible, and survived for decades in a condition that the most expert graders in the world would recognize immediately as extraordinary. Coins graded MS, 67 full steps or higher from a 1966 issue, are so vanishingly rare that their appearance at auction is treated as a major event by the entire numismatic community, the kind of moment that gets announced in advance, that draws bidders from every corner of the globe, that generates media coverage and expert commentary, and the kind of breathless anticipation normally reserved for world-class art sales or extraordinary jewelry auctions. And then there are the error coins. Oh, the error coins of 1966 are something that deserves an entire documentary of their own, because the production chaos of the mid-1960s Mint created a garden of magnificent mistakes that collectors have been hunting ever since. Double die errors from 1966 Jefferson nickels are among the most dramatic and visually stunning in all of American coinage, with certain specimens showing Jefferson's portrait doubled so clearly, so distinctly, so dramatically that even a casual observer with no numismatic training can see immediately that something extraordinary happened during the striking process. These double die obverse coins, particularly those that also carry the full steps reverse designation, are the kind of numismatic perfect storm that comes along perhaps once in a generation. And when they do appear, when one surfaces from an old collection or turns up at an estate sale or emerges from the kind of forgotten accumulation that numismatists dream about, the response from the collecting world is immediate and overwhelming. There are documented cases, verified, authenticated, professionally certified cases of 1966 Jefferson nickels being struck on planchets intended for other denominations entirely, creating coins of such bizarre and wonderful wrongness that they occupy their own special category of rarity, their own special tier of desirability. A 1966 Jefferson nickel struck on a cent planchet, for example, produces a coin that is smaller than normal, slightly off color, and bears a design that spills over the edges of the undersized blank in ways that are as visually striking as they are numismatically significant. A 1966 nickel struck on a dime planchet creates a coin so thin, so delicate, so almost impossibly lightweight that holding one feels like holding a secret, like holding proof that the universe occasionally decides to break its own rules just to see what happens. The human stories surrounding the 1966 Jefferson 5 cents are as extraordinary as the coin itself, because this is a coin that has appeared in the most unexpected places, in the hands of the most unlikely people, at moments that seemed impossibly perfect. There is the story, passed around in collector circles with the reverence normally given to sacred texts. An elderly woman in rural Virginia who brought a coffee can full of old coins to a local coin show, not expecting much, not knowing what she had, simply hoping to turn her late husband's hobby into a little extra money. And inside that coffee can, wrapped in an old handkerchief as if it had been deliberately protected for decades without its owner ever knowing its true value, was a 1966 Jefferson nickel in a state of preservation so perfect, so absolutely flawless, that the dealer who first examined it had to excuse himself from the table to compose himself before returning to make an offer. That coin eventually found its way to a professional grading service, received a designation that placed it among the finest known examples of the issue, and sold at auction for a figure that transformed the woman's retirement entirely. There is something deeply moving about stories like that, something that reminds us that numismatics is not simply about money or investment or the cold calculations of supply and demand. It is about history, about the physical survival of the past into the present, about the way a tiny disc of metal can carry within it the fingerprints of the people who made it, the economic forces that shaped its creation, the cultural moment that gave it life. The 1966 Jefferson 5 cents is all of those things and more. It is a time capsule from one of the most turbulent, most transformative, most consequential periods in American monetary history, and it is a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, even under the worst possible conditions, something extraordinary can emerge. When you hold a finest known 1966 Jefferson nickel in your hand, if you're ever fortunate enough to do so, you're holding a piece of American history that survived against all odds, that defied the conditions of its own creation, that slipped through the chaos of the mid-1960s mint and emerged on the other side as something so rare, so beautiful, so historically significant that the world's greatest collectors have valued it at $158 million. $158 million for a 5 cent piece. Let that number sit with you for a moment. Let wash over you. Let it change the way you think about the coins in your pocket, the coins in your jars, the coins in your inherited collections that you have never quite gotten around to going through carefully. Because the 1966 Jefferson 5 cents is proof, absolute, undeniable, breathtaking proof, that the most extraordinary treasure in the world can hide in the most ordinary place imaginable, waiting patiently, waiting quietly, waiting for the one person who knows enough to look carefully and wise enough to recognize what they are seeing when they do. This is the grand finale of today's Legacy Coins journey. And what a journey it has been. From the stunning $146 million heights of the 1961 Jefferson nickel to the even more staggering $158 million pinnacle of the 1966 Jefferson 5 cents. We have traveled through some of the most remarkable chapters in American numismatic history together. And I hope that what you have heard today has not only educated you and entertained you, but has genuinely changed the way you see the world of coins forever. Go home tonight and look through your nickels. Go carefully. Go slowly. Go with the knowledge that history has a habit of hiding its greatest treasures in the most ordinary places, and that the next life-changing discovery might already be sitting in your hands.